So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Esther Elgos. I'm the chair of networking programs at the American Marketing Association New York, where we work every day to inspire, support, and celebrate brilliance in marketing. COVID-19 quickly spread throughout the world and has changed our daily lives and the way we interact. A return to how life was at the start of 2020 is some way off. Even now that New York City has entered phase 2, coronavirus will affect our lives in many ways. As consumers emerge from stay-at-home orders and social distancing, how will their behaviors change? During the pandemic, consuming social media content and shopping online was the norm. What will happen post-COVID-19? Today, Aliza Freud, the founder and CEO of influencer marketing platform She Speaks, we'll talk about marketing post-COVID-19 and social unrest. She will present insights from consumer behavior reports, which have tracked attitudes and behaviors since the beginning of the pandemic. As a reminder, please everyone make sure to keep yourself on mute so there is no background noise, but feel free to use our chat to introduce yourself and ask our guest speaker any questions that she will reply after her presentation. You can also virtually raise your hand by clicking on the participants icon, and then on the right side of your screen below the participants, you can click raise hand. Thank you to our premier partner, Green Book, for supporting the AMA New York year-round, and also to our team of volunteers for their continued commitment and dedication. Finally, if you're considering becoming an AMA New York member, I invite you to join this dynamic organization to have access to essential resources for marketers, expand your network and knowledge, elevate your leadership profile by volunteering, and network among your peers. Aliza, please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Esther. And thank you so much to the AMA for organizing this event. I love when we get the chance to share insights from the research. We are constantly fielding proprietary research with our community of women, and it has been just a privilege to be able to share the insights of what's going on in the hearts and minds of our community members. And what we're going to do today is share insights from these two studies. But as Esther mentioned, we have been tracking this since the pandemic started. So we have access if anyone is interested. I believe that the AMA is going to provide my contact information afterwards. So please feel free to contact us. We would be happy to share with you the other ways where you can, place where you can access the other waves. Because I think one of the really interesting things, and I'm going to share that today, is when you look at how things are trending and how things are changing. There's some really interesting insight there. So just quickly, hello, and I want to just quickly introduce myself. My name is Aliza Freud. I'm the founder and CEO of She Speaks. If you are not familiar with She Speaks, we actually started in 2008 as an insights and research platform, and we were really dedicated to helping companies better understand what was going on in the hearts and minds of women. Fast forward to where we are today, what we realized pretty early on was that a lot of the women who were joining to be a part of our research panel were what you would call today influencers. So they were women who had blogs, they were very active in social media, and we realized that there was another opportunity for us to service brands and also service our community of women by sort of pairing up brands with the community to allow our members to help create content on behalf of brands, and then also to help distribute and amplify that content. So today we are a very large community of female influencers. We reach over 300 million consumers per month via our community, and we have the privilege of working with a lot of different companies across categories, from insurance companies to financial services companies, to CPG brands and beauty brands, but really to help them in an effort to really create a lot of great awareness for products and sales as well. So one of the things, though, that is the underpinning of who we are is we always start with insight. So everything that we do, I mentioned we started as a research platform, and that is very much in our DNA. So we are constantly asking our community of women from across the U.S. questions about what's going on in their lives and how they are reacting to a variety of different things. Once the pandemic started, we realized that it was really very much our obligation to ask what is going on in women's lives, how are they reacting. So this today is we're going to be sharing with you what is called Wave 7 of our study on coronavirus, and then talk through some of the implications of that for marketers. In addition, though, we thought we would be remiss if we did not share with you also some very fresh information about how women are feeling about social unrest, the social unrest that is going on across the country and really around the world. So what we're going to do today is we're going to share the latest findings of our social unrest survey, which this is going to be wave 2 of our social unrest survey. And we just completed fielding that on June 22nd, so just earlier this week. And then we will do the same thing with our wave 7 of the COVID survey, which also completed fielding on the 22nd. So, and as I mentioned before, we'll be taking the opportunity to point out where there are differences and on the trend side, and then what some implications are for marketers. So what I have experienced in the past, because we tend to present a lot of research and a lot of insights, I know that questions come up. So as Esther mentioned, please feel free to put the questions into the chat as we go. And we have allocated time so that we can answer those questions when we get towards the end. So please feel free. I know that questions come up, and some of them you want to ask while we're here on the webinar, and we certainly will have planned time to do that. So with that, I'm going to jump into some of the insights. So this is from our social unrest survey. There is a longer report on this. So also, as I mentioned, we will be happy to share the longer report with anyone who is interested. So we're going to share some highlights today. So we wanted to first understand whether people were talking to other people about the protests. So, were people talking about protests? Were they talking about the demonstrations and racism in the US? And over the course of the last couple of weeks. And as you can see, the number, so yes, people are talking to other people. Remember that this is or just know that this is a check all that applies. So somebody could be talking to a family member of a similar generation as well as to their friends. So just as a note on how to read this. So what you can see is, of course, the number one group that people are tending to talk about this with are people of a similar generation in their own family. Obviously, that could be a spouse, that could be a sibling, that could be a cousin, but somebody of the same generation. And then followed by friends, and family members of an older generation, and then children. So those are sort of the top 4, and you can see that those are by far the top 4. Then to a much lesser degree, people are talking to their coworkers about it. They're talking to other people on social media who they don't know in person, but maybe have connected with in social media. They're talking to family members of younger generations who are not their children. And then finally, we always have a group of people who, just are not engaged in the conversation or are not engaging in the conversation. We have about 7% of the people who said that they're not talking to anybody about these topics. The next thing that we wanted to do was really get a sense for sentiment in terms of how people were feeling about what's been going on over the last few weeks as it relates to social unrest. We put a series of statements in front of people, and as you can see, the 2 that pop the highest are the 2 in the middle there with the box around them. Racism of any kind is a terrible thing, but we need to have peaceful protesting. And I support the peaceful protesting of the Black Lives Matter movement. So those are the 2 top choices for people of these options. And again, this is a question where you could have chosen more than one answer. However, one thing that I want to point out here is sort of what's happening above the box in the middle and below the box. At the top, you can see that again, not surprisingly, just about 10% of the people say that they are participating in protests and or plan to participate in protests. So that's probably, if you kind of think about that on a national scale, that probably is slightly higher maybe than what's actually going on nationally in terms of people what people are actually protesting and participating in protests locally or in different places near them. But the other thing that's really interesting is looking kind of below the boxes there. And you can see that there's about a little less than 24% of the people that say, you know what, I think the US is an equal opportunity country. And interestingly, they are, you'll see throughout as we come up here that by and large, you do have people who are quite supportive of the protesting and what's been going on, but you have a group of people who are also feeling like the country is kind of where it should be and it is equal opportunity. And then you have a group here of 31% of people who say that although they don't themselves think that they are racist, they believe that they can do better. So we then wanted to understand, okay, where do people think the problem lies? Like where in our institutions is the problem? And I think what's really interesting here, and we've kind of highlighted some areas, we gave people a definition. So I just want to be clear, you can see the definition that was provided in this question for people of systemic racism down there at the bottom. And then we asked them to what extent they believe there was systemic racism in the US on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all and 5 being very much. And so what we did was we took the top 2 boxes, so the 4s and the 5s, and put those on the left here, and then the bottom 2 boxes, the 1s and the 2s, and we put those on the right. And as you can see, as I said earlier, that by and large, people do believe that there is racism. And there is a degree of systemic racism in the U.S., at least of the people that we were surveying, and you can see that the place that they think is happening the most is in housing. So that is the #1 area, as you can see at 50% here. Then followed #2 as a tie are employment advancement as well as overall police in the US. And what's interesting about that is obviously this started out as something that due to the death of George Floyd really started out as an issue about police, but really obviously it's people believe that it's a broader issue. And as you can see, police are not getting, the overall police in the US not getting very high marks in terms of lack of systemic racism. Also not getting high marks of the national government. You can see at 46% people believe that there is some sort of systemic racism going on at the national government level. Another thing I just want to quickly point out is the difference between people feeling like their local police, the difference between what they think their local police is how racism exists in local police versus the national, the overall police in the US. And that is a statistically significant difference between the 48% of top 2 box on overall police and 36% on the local police. And it's also not surprising. We find that in surveying and doing research that in general, you find that people, when you ask them what they think is going on in other parts of the country, they may rate that as something that is happening or exists and is higher and is happening more frequently than when you ask them about with their own area, where they're obviously potentially more familiar. They always seem to say that to whatever degree, there is a difference between what they think is going on right at home versus what's going on nationally. And I did want to point that out. This is something that we consistently see when we do surveying. We asked people if they thought that the protests would bring about change in the US. I mentioned that this is wave 2 of our protests and social unrest survey. You can see that the first one we did was on June 2nd, and this was really interesting. Back on June 2nd, only 31% of people agreed that the protests would help bring about change in the US. Fast forward to this June 22nd survey, and you can see that now 54% of people believe that the protests will actually help bring about change. 38% still not convinced, and about 8% who just said that it was not applicable to them. We always want to give people an option to, on a question like this, to sort of say, you know, I'm sort of in the middle somehow, either that I don't particularly know yet, or this is not something that I think is an issue. Moving on then to a little bit more specifically. So we asked people in the question prior if they think there's going to be change brought about by the protests. We wanted to then understand, okay, where do you think that there's going to be change, or how do you think things are going to change more specifically? And you can see that the number one answer, but very close second, is right next to it. The number one answer is the structure and the training of the police force, that's where there's going to be the biggest change, followed by people's perceptions and understanding of the awareness of racism. So interesting that those two are sort of topping the list in terms of where there's going to potentially people believe there will be change. And then I did want to point out that there are about 10% of the people, if you look there to the right of that, about 10% of the people who are concerned that people are actually going to be less supportive of change due to the protests. And that could be could be because of the rioting that has happened in some parts. So I just did want to mention that there are about 10% of the people who feel like that it actually could be a negative, the protests, in terms of bringing about change. So looking at then more specifically, because this issue did start very much as an issue focused on the police, and there have been lots of conversations, lots of discussion about defunding of the police. We wanted to understand from people if they felt that they supported the efforts to defund, disband, or downsize police departments. And you can see that, interestingly, although, as I mentioned earlier, on average, we do think that people seem to be supportive of what, on average, a little bit higher, people are more supportive of what's going on across the country as it relates to protesting. That does not necessarily translate into the defunding and disbandment of the police. You can see only 24% say that they favor it. You have 54% that say they do not favor it, and about 22% who aren't sure. So just an interesting thing, given that has been a big topic of conversation. So we couldn't not ask this question. We do a lot of surveying as it relates to the campaigns, when presidential campaigns are happening. And I will tell you that based on our prior experience with campaigns, our data has been tracking pretty accurately to what ends up happening in elections. And here, what we're finding, and this is that I want to make sure I caveat this. This is people, we obviously ask people in this survey, so remember the state of mind that people are in, who they're planning to vote for. And you can see that about 30% say Donald Trump, 45% say Joe Biden, about 20% are undecided, they're not sure, and about 5% are saying other. I do want to mention that we asked this same question in our Wave 6 coronavirus survey. And what I will tell you is that it was virtually similar, except for some slight changes. Donald Trump in that survey had 28% of people saying that they were going to vote for him. That went up slightly to 30%. So I just want to mention that we have asked this question recently in the past and saw very slight changes, and also in different contexts. So, right, so that survey, that question that we asked in the Wave 6 of coronavirus survey had almost almost the same answers. And in this, as we see in this survey, that was in the context of the protests and the social unrest going on across the US. So just an interesting information as it relates to the coronavirus, to the elections. So we know that brands are getting involved in the conversation as it relates to what's going on across the country and racism. And Nike, of course, was one of the first that jumped on that. They also had Blackout Tuesday, which I'm sure a lot of people are very familiar with. But we wanted to understand from people, with all of the brands getting involved, how do people feel about that? Do people think that that companies should get involved and speak out about the issue? And you can see that close to 50% of the people said yes. 31%, I think also rightly so. I think that it's a fair caveat, say it depends, right? Obviously everything is in context. So you have a very sizable part of the population that are either saying yes, or, it depends. It depends how they do it. And only about 20% of the people who say no. I want to point out that we asked a similar question about whether brands should be saying things or being supportive in different ways of coronavirus in one of our coronavirus waves of studies, and found that only 42% said yes there. Now, that is a statistically significant difference between the 42% yes in that survey and the 49% here. But I did want to point out that we had asked a very similar question as it relates to coronavirus and had a lower percentage of people who agreed with that statement. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the coronavirus wave 7 and how people are reacting to what's going on right now. One thing that we ask people, and we want to make sure that we do this often, is we really check in on the state of mind. How are people feeling? Because it does impact very much how we think about marketing. How do we think about talking to people based on how they're emotionally, what's going on with them emotionally? And what we found is that over the course of all of these surveys that we've been doing, the waves of studies, uncertainty is always the #1 emotion. It has persisted to be #1. However, it has gone down, and I'm going to show you a trend analysis in a minute. But uncertainty is always the #1 emotion. In this case, following uncertainty is hopefulness. Frustration is after that, and then anxiousness and being scared. And one of the things I want to mention is that we are seeing that in the early days of these studies, of these waves of studies, the top 4 emotions were always negative emotions, meaning uncertainty, frustration, anger, anxiousness. What we started to see emerge in April is that hopefulness became one of the top 4 emotions, which is I think a positive thing. So I do want to point out that since about mid-April, you can see that hopefulness sort of broke into those top 4 emotions. We asked people how much longer they think the crisis is going to last. And interestingly, what we're seeing is that over time, and I'm going to show you the trend on this and the question before in a minute, what we're seeing is that as time goes on, people are thinking it's going to last longer, and importantly, they're more uncertain about it. So this change here, we had an 11-point change. We did, one of our waves of surveys happened on May 5th. And back then, about 21% of people said that they really didn't know. We fast forward to this June survey, this June study, and you can see that that number has gone up. So what's happening over time is people are becoming, they're just less certain about what's going to happen. They feel like there's, they think that it's going to be one way, and then that changes on them. So as I mentioned at the front, we are going to see this pattern of uncertainty kind of rising up. So this is the trend that I wanted to show you. I know this might be hard to read. Hopefully you guys can see this. This blue line here, right? This is, the source here is the COVID-19 data repository by the Center of Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins. And what this is tracking here is new COVID-19 cases, right? So that's what this blue line here is. We see the spike, and then things start to come down, and then we see the new spike that's coming up, that's started to emerge over the last few weeks. What we then did was we overlaid from our studies this feeling of anxiousness, which is this orange line here, and you can see that at its peak, right, as the cases were on the increase at its peak, you have the most anxiousness, and then that started to come down. And now, as we see, as soon as you see this uptick in the COVID-19 cases, then people are getting more anxious. So again, here, what we did was we overlaid the data on that question I was just showing you about believing the crisis will last 6+ months. And you can see in the beginning, early on, people were like, you had a pretty low percentage of people who thought that it was going to last a really long time. But then it started to increase. It had a big jump. It started to flatten out as the cases start to flatten out. But then as soon as the cases start to spike, you see that that's coming back up. So very much the anxiousness and the belief of how long it's going to go on is very much correlated to the cases and the new COVID study. So just a thing to think about in terms of how people are feeling. Okay, so which of the following statements do you agree with? We asked people how they were behaving right now. So you can see that the number one thing people are saying is that they are avoiding large crowds. They are maintaining social distancing when they go outside. They are wearing masks or covering when they are not maintaining social distance. You can just see how that kind of plays out here. I'm going to show you about what people are actually doing in a second, but I want to quickly make sure that we explain what it means, because we can't say to people, how do you anticipate you're going to behave when the coronavirus is over, or you think that the crisis is over, unless we understand what they mean by the crisis being over. So as you can see, not surprisingly, most people say that the way that they're going to know that the crisis is over is because there's a vaccine. So 64% say that, or some sort of medication. I want to point out these bottom two here. So what we're seeing is we're starting to see is that there has been a lack of trust. There is a lack of trust in terms of how consumers are feeling about not just the federal government. So only 16% say that if the federal government announces that the crisis is over, then they will think the crisis is over, but also the local government. And you can see here that is 16% also say that, if the local government says it's over, then that's when I'll think it's over. So a relatively low percentage, which just really goes to the idea that people are not really trusting what their local or the federal government is necessarily telling them about when they should think that the crisis is over. All right. I mentioned before that we asked people how they were thinking about activities once they felt comfortable that the coronavirus was over. You saw what that meant in the slide before. But here is, and I'm going to juxtapose two slides here for you that I think are very interesting. This is what people say they will feel comfortable doing. This is what they say on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely they are going to do these activities once they feel comfortable that the coronavirus crisis is over. And it's a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very likely, 1 being not likely at all. So similar to the other questions that we showed. And what we did here was we put the top 2 boxes, so the 4s and the 5s from our June 22nd survey, and we put them next to our top 2 boxes from our June 1st survey, because we asked the same question in our June 1st survey. And across the board, except for going to friends and family's home, which was dipped slightly, went from 71% to 68%. Across the board, though, other than that, everything has gone up. in terms of people feeling like they're going to do these things once they feel comfortable that the crisis is over. And I think, as I said before, a lot of what we look at, because we do so many of these surveys, is really to understand the trend. I think that this is interesting given what we were saying before about how the anxiety levels kind of go up and down and the uncertainty levels go up and down. And interestingly, what we're finding from the June 1st to the June 22nd is that people seem way more likely to be doing things. They say they're going to be way more likely to do those things in this latest survey than they were in the one that we did just 3 weeks ago. So just some interesting things to take note of there. Now, I mentioned that this next slide I think is interesting to look at in concert with the one before. So the one before showed you what people said they were going to be doing or what they thought they would be doing. This is what they say they have done or they anticipate doing within the next week. So you can see that we see that people have 44% say they have gone to see friends. That is up 4 points from our June 1st survey. They have gone to public parks. That's up 7 points. They are going out to eat, up 11 points. They're gone to hair and nail salons. We're going to talk a little bit about hair in a minute. But you can see that people are actually starting to venture out, and more so than they were obviously earlier in June. So just some interesting insights there, especially when you compare it to what people say that they are thinking they will do, which was on the slide before. We then wanted to understand from people, look, the country is reopening, and it's been reopening for several weeks now. Do you think that's a good idea? And this we thought was very interesting, especially since people do seem to increasingly say they're going to be going out, actually going out, what we just showed on the last couple slides. You can see here that we actually had a drop in the percentage of people who said that they thought it was a good idea for businesses to reopen. We asked this question in our June 1st study, and 52% of the people said yes then. You compare that to where we are today in this latest survey, and only 40% say that was a good idea, that it is a good idea. And similarly, you can see that there is now a change to people saying no. It is so an increase there in people saying no, but also going back to that trend I mentioned about uncertainty. There is just this uncertainty thing we see often here, and we'll see it throughout, is that people feel more uncertain. Right, so you have 27% more people saying in this survey that they just aren't sure if it's a good idea. So again, another point about that uncertainty. We then asked people, have they actually gone? Oh, excuse me. Have they actually gone to these businesses and these stores that have reopened? And you can see that there is a jump. 51% say that they have. That was up from 36% in our June 1st survey. And that is, again, sometimes there's this disconnect between people kind of saying they're anticipating about being scared about it and then what they're actually going to do. So really interesting kind of difference there in terms of what people are actually doing. And we suspect that maybe it's that people are also just really kind of feeling like they've been stuck at home and they just, want to get out. Okay, one other thing that I want to mention here, because this is an interesting opportunity. I don't know if there's anybody on the line that works at a food company, a company that sells food to consumers, but one of the things that we have been tracking is this idea that people people have been cooking at home. We know that that people are increasingly cooking at home, and we said to them, look, are you enjoying it? Do you feel like you're going to continue to do that? And 47% said yes, I am cooking at home, and I'm expecting I'm going to do more of it. And that is up actually from our May 5th survey. That is up 15%. And we're seeing this trend line that, in terms of people are cooking more at home and they're not necessarily sick of it. And that is a really interesting opportunity, I think, for if you're a food brand and you sell a product and your product can be an ingredient. People are expecting, they are planning to eat at home more often, prepare more meals at home, even once the pandemic is over. So we did want to point that out. We then talked to people about vacations. It is summertime. It is a time that people tend to go on vacations. But what we found was that 42% of people said that they are not planning to do a vacation. Just 20% said that they were. Another close to 20% said that they're going to take a staycation. And then again, that uncertainty coming up, about 20% still not sure about what they're going to do. So if you think about it, you know, there's an interesting opportunity here also for if you are a company that provides a product that could help people with activity while they're at home, because so many people are planning to not take vacations. They are going to do a staycation. They're just not going away. They're not sure if they're going to go away. If you have a product where you can kind of show a consumer how they are able to create an experience for themselves, taking a picnic, going to the beach, doing something that is relatively close to home that they can do, that is an activity, there is an interesting opportunity there, given the number of people who say that they are just not planning to go out and take vacation this summer. So not surprisingly, if you are a parent of a child at home who is, who has a child at home, given the number of people that we just said are planning to not take vacations, we asked those parents, hey, if you have a child at home, are you concerned about them not having enough activities to occupy them? Not surprisingly, a large percentage of them are concerned about not having activities for their kids. Again, a really interesting opportunity then for companies who maybe make products that can engage and entertain kids, whether that's games or trivia or any type of product that could, parents they're not going away. A lot of them are not going away with their kids. They might normally be doing that. Their kids may be usually in camp. They're not necessarily in camp. So what do they do with their children? There could be a very interesting opportunity for brands that could show parents ways that they can engage and interact with their kids or entertain their children while they're not away over the summer. And maybe that's more than just having them sit and watch Netflix. So thinking about the fall, we wanted to quickly just ask, while we were on the topic of kids, we asked people if schools were to reopen K through 12 and college in the fall, are you planning to send your children? And as you can see, the majority of people, 52%, so slight majority, say yes. 11% are not going to do it. And then again, that uncertainty coming up, 37% saying they're still not sure. They don't know what they're going to do. So just another data point. Now, thinking about the holidays, I know that a lot of marketers have lots of activity in terms of their communications and advertising that happens over the summer months to coincide with 4th of July. Different activities over the summer, Labor Day, and then also thinking about Halloween, looking to the future of Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. So we asked people, hey, are you planning to get together with your friends or family over that time? And again, I'll keep pointing it out, the not sure here on the right, relatively large percentage of people who are still not sure about what they're going to be doing. And interestingly, what you see is that as time goes out, in terms of the further away we get from that time, you have more and more uncertainty. And so it's not that people think, oh, it's going to be Thanksgiving and Christmas, so this is going to be gone by then, and I will absolutely be getting together with my family or friends. The further out we go, because of that uncertainty about how much longer this is going to last, you have more and more uncertainty from people. So just an interesting, take about whether people are getting together, how they're doing it, whether it's socially distanced or not, and how that's looking like it's plotting out for the rest of the year. Okay, so consumption. We asked people about their buying behaviors as it relates to large ticket items. As you can see here, home furnishings, I just want to quickly point out that we think that a lot of this has to do, it's definitely number one on this list here of large ticket items. And we think a lot of this has to do with the fact that people have been at home. And so maybe they've been looking around and thinking, what can I do to make my home better? And so an interesting opportunity, if you're a brand that has products to enhance people's homes, it seems like it's very much on people's minds. A more granular look at this in terms of other buying option, of other purchase categories. I will not spend a ton of time on this. As I said, we're going to share this deck with you so you have it afterwards. But what you notice is that across the board, there is a decrease in terms of, there's more decrease in terms of what people say they're going to be spending on these items versus the increase. So just in terms of anticipation, just a different perspective from consumers. Finally, we asked people about the optimism about the economy. And we tend to look at this. We look at this at different points in the year. We very often look at this at the end of the year, going into a new year, to understand how people feel about how the new year is going to shake out from an economic standpoint. We wanted to understand over the next 6 months, because the economy is on so many people's minds. We have an election coming up. We know the economy weighs heavily on people's decision as it relates to the election. We wanted to understand how consumers are feeling about the economy over the next 6 months. And interestingly, yes, the number one answer is cautiously optimistic. But I want to point out, as somebody on our team did when they looked at this data, if you add the cautiously optimistic and the positive, it very much is almost the same exact number. It's about, you're at 41% there. It's almost the same exact number as the people who are worried, the percentage of people who are worried that the economy is getting worse, and they're very concerned we're heading into a deep depression, which is about 42%. So interesting that, you have this, what we tend to see when we ask about the economy is, people are usually either more positive on average, or they're more negative. You don't generally see this equality in the people who are positive as the people who are more positive as you have for the people who are feeling more negative. That then goes into our last question here about how people are feeling about their own, their companies, their own families' comfort about their financial situation. And you can see that on average, you actually have people feeling more positively about their own financial situation. So 14% very comfortable and 34% somewhat comfortable. So 48% who are feeling, relatively more positive, and about 9% who are very concerned. And then you add to that the 19% who are somewhat concerned. And you still have, as I said, then you have more people feeling more positively about their own finances, their own family finances, than they do feel negatively about that. So that's some of the data from these surveys. And what I wanted now to very quickly do, I know we want to have time for questions. I'm just going to show a couple of examples of marketers who, or brands that we think have done a really good job of engaging consumers right now and why it's worked. So Eva Longoria, who is an ambassador for L'Oreal, I can tell you right now that Eva does not tend to color her hair at home usually, but because she's under stay-at-home orders, she has had, her grade comes in and she's had to color her hair. This video that she recorded went viral and has done very well for them. It's a bit of a how-to. It's also very entertaining because she talks people through. I don't know if anyone has seen this, but a really great example of providing something very timely, also getting at a population of people that maybe don't typically buy hair color at home. and just touching on a need. And really just a very smart advertisement from L'Oreal. We're seeing a lot of brands, of chefs, influencers doing cooking at home. Chef Arts, who is a winner of one of the Food Network shows. He has a bunch of restaurants, but obviously those restaurants had not been opened, so he took it online and he started doing live sessions with his with other people. In this case, I think this boy is he's an actor from Netflix's Lost in Space, and he did a Facebook Live with him. You can see that brands, this is Barilla Pasto, brands can be integrated into this conversation, a really interesting opportunity to showcase a product as an ingredient. Other brands, not surprisingly, are jumping in on this. So you can see that, you have brands taking things live and getting really strong reach by, tapping into influencers' audiences and having and giving them content that is useful to them at this time. And just some good examples of brands really reacting well. This is an example with Kit Kat for a new product launch. This has been a product that they did not expect to be launching during a pandemic, but has been a huge success for them. We believe that a lot of the success has been that they really tapped into digital in a big way. They use this influencer, Allison Hannigan. She's from a number of shows, American Pie, also the movie, and How I Met Your Mother, a lot of different shows. And she created content for them. But one of the things to think about is, as you are creating content right now, as you are thinking about marketing to your audience, be sure to think about it carefully, because what you have to do is strike the right tone so that people do not negatively react and think that something is tone deaf. And they did a pretty good job of that here. So with that, I know that we are running short on time. I'm going to make sure we have, about 10 minutes now, hopefully, for questions. I know that's a lot of stuff that we went through. So I appreciate that, that you guys were hopefully able to get some value out of that. Esther, do we have some questions?
We have a couple in the chat.
Okay. Let me see if I can try to find that.
The first two were Monique. She asked if you have any demographics on the respondents.
Yes. We do have demographics on all of the respondents. We can provide you with information on geographically where they live, age, age, income, ethnicity. So yes, all of that information is available for all the waves of the survey. So, if you are interested in follow-up, we're happy to share that out with you.
Drew also asked, how was the sample size determined for these studies?
What we always do is we pick what we do on surveys like this, because these are meant to be representative of a national population. So each survey is different, but because both of these surveys, the protest social unrest survey, as well as our coronavirus surveys, those are meant to be representative of a national sample. So we take a group of people who represent ethnicity, age, income, across the US, and we put the survey out to that population. And then when we get, we tend to look for a minimum of 1,000 responses so that we can slice and dice things in different ways and look at it and look at the differences. There are definitely differences when you look at this across different demographics. But yes, the way that we typically look at this is, what are we trying to show in terms of the representative sample of people? That's how we choose the group that we go out to, and then once we know we have enough people to represent those percentages within our data set, then we pull the data.
We have a couple more questions. How are the responses different between those who are still employed and those who lost their jobs?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I would have to. I don't know that we have cross-tabbed it that way. We have asked people how they've been impacted, so it's certainly a question that we can cross-tab the data and the data set on. So excellent question. We just have not cross-tabbed it that way. If you want to follow up with me, I will, and there's a question in particular or some things that you want to know about, we would be happy to share that. What I will tell you is, again, I'm trying to remember the percentage of people who said that they had lost their jobs. I believe that we had probably about 25% of people who said that their job was impacted, either if they were working part-time, that they had fewer hours, or that they lost their job completely.
Another question, do you think that people will be more sensitive to sustainability concern?
Sustainability as in the environment? I just want to make sure
there's no specific, but maybe we'll get an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, we have right now, what we find when we survey people is that when there is a very big national conversation going on about something, that tends to take up the share of mind. Like, that's what people are focused on. That's what they're thinking about. That's what they're getting engaged with. So to the extent that right now, people are very focused on the issue of racism and health, right? Because people are still, and in some cases, there are people who are more concerned. Like if you live in Arizona, if you live in Florida, you are probably more concerned maybe than you were before about coronavirus. I would think that if you live in the New York City area, you've been concerned about it for a long time. But if you lived in other states, like Arizona, like Florida, they were not seeing the spikes that we were in the New York area. So that is the issue of racism and equality, as well as the health and being, having your family, yourself healthy. Those are very much taking up, I think, the share of mind for people in terms of what we're asking them. So in that context, you'd probably see environmental issues be just not popping as high in terms of what's on people's minds. It doesn't mean that they go away. It's just not right now what's taking up unnecessarily share of mind.
Definitely. Gabriela here asks, which should be the role of influencers to generate engaging consumer experiences in this context?
So what should be the role of influencers?
Yes, to generate engaging consumer experiences.
Well, first of all, let me take a step back and just say that the reason that influencers could be an option right now for companies, for brands that are interested in obviously reaching an audience is because some of the more traditional routes, the promotional and traditional routes of reaching them are just not there, right? And where people are, right? I mentioned, I know we have in another study, but we've talked about the fact that engagement on social media has skyrocketed since the pandemic started, because people are at home. And they are, they have some more time on their hands. So with that as the context, that is where the audience is, right? Influencers have seen their engagement rates rise significantly. They've seen the number of followers that they have rise significantly since the pandemic began. And that's on the positive side in terms of, if you're a brand trying to reach an audience, you need to go where the audience is. So having said that, influencers could be a good solution. The thing that you have to do is make sure that you are creating content that is not tone deaf. And we have definitely seen examples since the pandemic started where, brands have stepped in it or influencers have stepped in it. They have created content, they were posting things about how wonderful their lives are towards the beginning of the pandemic, where people are just terrified about their health. And that just, did not strike the right tone. So there are pitfalls to, to how to post. But if you work with influencers who are good, who understand their audience, and the lion's share of influencers, I think, they do a really good job of understanding their audience. And they have the target customer that you want to get through to. It's a great way to engage them, to showcase your product. The other thing that I would always say is that it should be done with the mindset of, how does this product, what is the benefit of this product for my audience? So whenever you engage an influencer, make sure that they are creating benefit-driven, not feature-driven, but benefit-driven content, because that's what's going to resonate with their audience. And the good news is that good influencers, which hopefully are the ones you would work with, they pretty much know how to do that really well.
Wonderful. Let me see. I don't think we have any more questions. I do have a question. So what are the next steps in your study, in both studies? What are you planning on doing? If you can share a little bit.
So we feel we are going to continue. We do these every 2 weeks on average. And I will say that we are in between these surveys. We do other surveys, but we make sure that we are engaging with the audience and asking them about these topics every couple of weeks. And as I mentioned, we see lots of change over the course of that time, but we will continue to be asking people questions, understanding their perceptions and what that's going to mean for them. We are going to quickly be getting towards the fall, and questions that we asked for going into the back to school timing, going into what the season where you have a lot of people who might be starting to get the typical flu season, and then going into the holidays. So we will continue to track these things as it relates to both social unrest as well as coronavirus. So if you're interested in getting that data, just let us know. And we're happy to share that. I believe that if you go to our corporate site, which the address is on the screen there, thesheSpeaksInc.com, you can sign up for our newsletter. And in that, we tend to share the results of these surveys and this data, so you can access the data.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Aliza. It was such an engaging presentation, and thank you for sharing the results of both studies. I hope you all gain critical insight into consumer behavior and attitudes, which will help inform your current and future marketing strategy. Please don't forget to complete our post-event survey. We value your feedback, and it will be taken into account as we build our events calendar for 2020-2021. Also, if you're not following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, please do so you can stay tuned about our latest news, upcoming events, and much more. Finally, if anyone has any questions regarding the AMA New York membership benefits or how to become a volunteer, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn. And thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.